The new girl seems awfully interested in neurology, sweetheart. Should we get you an application to med school? That is what Dr. Marcus Whitfield said 48 minutes before everything changed. Laura Bennett moves through Seattle General's pediatric neurology ward with the kind of efficiency that comes from having already seen worse. Much worse. 3 months she's been here, always arriving early, always precise, never lingering at the nurse's station for gossip like the others. Her hands are steady when she changes fours. Her eyes catch details, medication interactions, lab abnormalities, the slight tremor in a resident's voice that signals doubt. No one notices because she doesn't want to be noticed. In the medication supply closet on the 4th floor, she catalogs pharmaceutical inventory with unusual focus, her fingers tracing each label like she's committing them to some classified database. The faded surgical scar running down her left forearm catches the fluorescent light as she reaches for the pediatric sedatives. She favors her left leg slightly when the shift gets long, a limp that deepens around hour 8, the kind of injury that teaches you how to hide pain. The morning started like most mornings at Seattle General in San Antonio. 5:56 a.m. Laura was already at her locker, uniform pressed, name tag clipped precisely at the correct angle. The pediatric ward smelled like antiseptic and the faint copper undertone of child sick, a smell she'd learned to process as data rather than feeling. Vital signs. Prognosis. Treatment options. Nothing personal. That was the mission. That was always the mission. She pulled her dark hair into a regulation knot and reviewed the census in her mind, 14 pediatric patients, 3 in neurology consult, 1 that mattered. Maya Rodriguez. 8 years old. Paralyzed from the waist down with no diagnosis anyone could agree on. The chart was thick with specialist consultations, each one concluding the same thing: permanent nerve damage, unknown etiology, no treatment options. Dead ends written in clinical language. But Laura had read the toxicology panels during her breaks, the ones that stopped too early, the ones that never tested for the exotic compounds naval intelligence suspected. That wasn't accident. That was deliberate. She could feel it the way a hunter feels a trap being set. Dr. Marcus Whitfield arrived for morning rounds at 7:15 a.m., trailing 3 residents who moved like satellites in his gravitational field. He was handsome in the way wealthy men are handsome: expensive teeth, expensive haircut, a Rolex that cost more than most nurses made in a month. His voice carried the particular confidence of someone who'd never been told no by anyone who mattered. He'd been chief of pediatric neurology for 9 years. Before that, something prestigious at Johns Hopkins. Before that, a fellowship that involved connections Laura could trace back through 3 different hospital boards. That was his power, not competence, though he had enough of that. Connections. Old money. The kind of institutional weight that made questioning his judgment feel like treason. The rounds moved through the ward in their usual pattern. Room 302. Room 305. Room 311. The residents presented cases with appropriate deference, and Whitfield delivered diagnoses like pronouncements from a medical oracle. Then they reached room 318. Maya Rodriguez lay in the bed looking smaller than 8 years old should look, her dark eyes tracking the doctors as they entered like she was counting them. Her mother sat in the corner chair, coffee untouched on the side table, the kind of exhausted that only parents of chronically ill children understood. On the shelf behind the bed, someone, the father, Laura assumed, had arranged photographs. Maya before. Running across a beach. Laughing in a swimming pool. The before pictures that haunt every pediatric ward in America. Partial spinal cord demyelination, Whitfield said, reviewing the chart without actually reading it. Likely autoimmune origin. We've ruled out infection, ruled out structural compromise. At this point, management is supportive care and pain control. The paralysis is permanent. He said it the way you'd describe the weather. Laura watched from the doorway. Protocol dictated she remain in the background unless needed, and felt something shift in her jaw. The residents nodded. The mother closed her eyes like she'd heard this sentence before and was bracing for the impact of hearing it again. One of the residents, a nervous kid named Harrison, asked quietly, "What about the environmental toxicology?" The preliminary screening showed some unusual markers. "Inconclusive," Whitfield interrupted, not looking up from the chart. "Probably contamination from the sample collection. We treat what we can prove, not what we guess about." Laura's hand tightened around the medication cart handle. The metal was cold under her palm. She'd been trained by people whose job was reading what wasn't being said, whose career depended on noticing when professionals stopped looking. The toxicology panels had stopped looking. That wasn't coincidence. That was choice. As they filed out, Whitfield glanced at her, really looked at her for the first time. His eyes were the color of wet concrete, and they narrowed with something that might have been recognition if he could have possibly recognized what stood in front of him. "You're the new nurse," he said. It wasn't a question. 3 months now? "Yes, doctor," Laura said. Her voice was trained to be soft, deferential. This was the mask she wore every day. This was the voice of someone who had nothing dangerous to hide. "The new girl seems awfully interested in neurology," he continued, and his smile had the quality of a shark showing teeth. "I noticed you reviewing Maya's chart during your break yesterday. Should we get you an application to med school, sweetheart?" The word landed like a deliberate insult, sweetheart, like she was a child, like her question about treatment options was the cute confusion of someone who didn't know better. The residents laughed on cue. One of them actually snorted. Laura felt the attention of the entire ward shift toward her, felt the nurses at the station turning to watch, felt the weight of the moment like atmospheric pressure before a storm. Her jaw clenched. Just barely. Just enough that only someone trained to read micro-expressions would notice. Her hands remained perfectly steady on the medication cart. "Of course, doctor," she said quietly. "My apologies for overstepping." "No harm done," he said, and turned away like she'd already stopped mattering. But that wasn't the worst part. That wasn't even the opening move. That was just Dr. Whitfield being lazy, being arrogant, being the kind of man who'd never encountered a person who could actually challenge him and survived. He had no idea that he'd just made a mistake. He had no idea what he'd just challenged. Laura got her lunch from the staff refrigerator at 11:06 a.m., turkey sandwich, apple, water bottle, and was walking toward the break room when Dr. Whitfield appeared in the crowded cafeteria like a collision waiting to happen. He was talking to the nursing director, gesturing broadly, his voice pitched to carry. "I'll bet you $50 the new girl won't last a week with the real cases," he was saying. "She's got that look. The kind that can't handle the hard ones. Watch how fast she requests a transfer when things get difficult." The nursing director, Martha, who'd been running pediatric nursing for 17 years, looked uncomfortable. She glanced toward Laura, then away, the quick look of someone caught between hospital hierarchy and basic decency. Laura was still moving, still holding her lunch tray, still maintaining the composure of someone who hadn't heard. She was 3 feet away when Whitfield turned directly into her path, not accidentally but with the precision of a man executing a calculated move. His hand came up, and Laura's tray followed the physics of the moment, sandwich and apple and water bottle scattering across the tile floor like they'd been shot from a cannon. "Oh God, I'm so sorry," Whitfield said, and his tone made it clear he was not sorry at all. "You should watch where you're going, sweetheart. Clumsy could be dangerous in a hospital." The cafeteria went quiet. Not gradually. All at once. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like they were broadcasting the moment to the entire building. Laura looked at the scattered food on the tile, at Whitfield's expression of fake contrition, at the faces of every person in the room watching to see what she would do. She could have cried. That's what people expected. She could have made a scene, reported him to HR, gone to the nursing director with shaking hands. That's what someone who was just a nurse would have done. Instead, she got paper towels. She cleaned up the mess, turkey, apple skin, water spreading across the tile like spilled time, while Whitfield returned to his conversation with Martha as if nothing had happened. Her hands were steady. Her jaw was set. She'd survived things that would have destroyed people who needed cafeteria food to feel like they were having a bad day. But she filed it away. That was the training. File it. Catalog it. Use it later. Around 2:15 p.m., during afternoon rounds, Whitfield demonstrated what happened when a person with institutional power wanted to make a point. He appeared at Laura's station, the medication counter where she was verifying pediatric dosages for the night shift, and simply dropped Maya Rodriguez's medical chart on her feet. Not dropped. Through. Hard enough that it scattered across the tile and several sheets slid under the adjoining desk. The entire nursing station stopped moving. "Since you're so interested in cases above your pay grade, sweetheart, you can pick that up," he said. His voice was loud enough for everyone to hear. His smile was wide enough to kill with. The other nurses looked away. One of them suddenly became very focused on a computer screen. The resident standing nearby studied the wall with unusual intensity. Laura was being issued a public lesson about hierarchy. About knowing her place. About what happened when junior staff questioned attending physicians. She bent down and gathered the scattered papers. The chart was thick, months of consultations, imaging reports, pathology slides, all documenting a little girl's slow descent into paralysis. She organized them with her hand steady and her jaw clenched just hard enough to be visible, just hard enough that her control looked like restraint rather than fear. When she straightened, she placed the chart carefully on the counter and returned to verifying medications like Whitfield had already stopped existing. That's when Sergeant Major Carlos Rodriguez appeared at the end of the hallway. He moved the way military men move when they've spent enough time in combat zones to understand the exact relationship between space and survival. He was large, not fat, but big in the way that comes from genuine strength rather than gym hours, with the kind of face that had seen things no face should see. His uniform was dress blues, crisp and perfect, and the insignia on his sleeve meant he'd earned authority the hard way. More than that, his presence had the terrifying quality of a person who'd already survived the worst the world could offer. He carried himself like pain was information he'd already processed. His dark eyes found his daughter's room, then drifted across the nursing station, then settled on Laura for just a moment longer than necessary. He didn't recognize her. Naval intelligence had briefed her on that. He wouldn't recognize her. The morphine from his injuries in Helmand Province 9 years ago, the blood loss, the trauma that took up so much mental real estate in PTSD and recovery, it all conspired to keep her face blurry in his memories. She was just another blonde woman. Just another nurse moving through the hospital with competence and invisibility. He had no way of knowing that the woman who dragged him 3 miles through enemy territory with a severed femoral artery was standing 12 feet away, checking pediatric medication orders like this was just another shift. But he knew something. Something in the way she moved, the way her hands worked with absolute precision, the way she didn't flinch when Whitfield humiliated her. He stood in the hallway for a moment, watching her work, his jaw working like he was chewing on a memory that wouldn't quite surface. Then he walked into Maya's room, and the door closed behind him, and whatever fragment of recognition might have sparked died in the darkness of his daughter's illness. Laura finished verifying the medications. She returned the cart to its proper place. She checked the time, 2:51 p.m., and felt the weight of what was coming settle across her shoulders like a familiar coat. Whitfield had no idea that he'd just challenged someone whose job was surviving impossible situations. He had no idea that every insult, every humiliation, every public mockery was being catalogued and stored and would eventually be used against him with surgical precision. He had no idea what was standing at the medication counter in scrubs and a name tag, looking like she was just trying to get through her shift. But something was starting to move. Something was waking up. And in exactly 48 minutes, a Black Hawk would land on the helipad, and everything Whitfield thought he understood about the world would become a question that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Maya crashed at 2:33 p.m. on a Tuesday, her small body convulsing against the hospital bed as fluid accumulated in her chest cavity like an unwelcome intruder. One moment she was stable, oxygen saturation 94%, heart rate normal for an 8-year-old, and the next her monitors shrieked in unison, a chorus of alarms that turned every head on the pediatric floor. The ventilator began fighting her, its rhythmic hiss becoming labored, desperate. Cardiac tamponade. The fluid pressing against her heart, strangling it, suffocating it from the inside. Laura knew it the second the rhythm degraded. She was at Maya's bedside when the girl's eyes rolled back, her small fingers clawing at the sheets. Dr. Whitfield appeared in the doorway, his face draining of color as he registered the monitor readings. O2 sat dropping, 92, 88, 84. His hands began to shake visibly as he approached the bed, his movement slow, uncertain. A surgeon who had forgotten how to act. His mouth opened and closed without sound for 3 full seconds before he finally spoke, his voice cracking like a adolescent's. Get cardiothoracic. Now. Someone call surgery. He gripped the bedside rail, knuckles white, staring at Maya's grey-tinged skin as if willing her to survive through sheer force of disappointment. The attending physician on the floor, Dr. Rebecca Morse, a competent woman in her 50s, picked up the phone. We need a cardiothoracic surgeon. Peds. Now. The operator's response crackled back, ETA 12 minutes. Maybe 11. She doesn't have 12 minutes, Morse said quietly, looking at Whitfield for direction. He had none to give. He was a diagnostician, not a surgeon. His specialty was telling people what was wrong, not fixing it while blood pooled and hearts failed. Laura moved before conscious thought could organize itself. She was at the crash cart, hands moving with the terrifying fluid precision of someone who had trained for this exact scenario in basements that never appeared on any hospital directory. 14-gauge needle. Betadine swab across the chest wall. The landmarks burned into her muscle memory from 1,000 other nights, the 5th intercostal space, the mid-axillary line. Pain was information. Pain was data. She shouldered past Whitfield without looking at him, her body language carrying the weight of absolute certainty. There was no hesitation, no checking with the senior physician, no moment of deference to hierarchy. She simply took control the way an apex predator moves through water, not aggressive, just undeniably present. Step back, she said. Not a request. A command. Her voice had dropped 2 full octaves from the deferential tone she'd maintained for 3 months, and every person in the room heard it. Nurses froze mid-movement. The resident froze. Even Morse, the attending, stepped backward instinctively. Laura's hands were absolutely steady as she prepped the skin. The needle went in, one smooth motion between the ribs, through muscle and fascia. The hiss of air escaping. Negative pressure releasing like a sigh of relief. She advanced the catheter and withdrew the plunger. 200 cc of straw-colored fluid emerged, streaming into the collection chamber. Gravity did the rest. O2 sat climbed, 88, 92, 96, 98. Heart rate normalized. The monitor rhythm smoothed into a clean, steady line. Sinus rhythm. Beautiful, perfect sinus rhythm. The entire procedure took exactly 90 seconds. The silence that followed was the kind that makes fluorescent lights seem impossibly loud, their electric hum suddenly audible, suddenly accusatory. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Dr. Moore stared at Laura's hands, still perfectly steady, as if seeing them for the first time. The resident looked at the monitor. The nurse at the head of the bed checked Maya's pupils. All of them waiting for someone to explain what had just happened. Waiting for Laura to explain. She didn't. She simply began documenting, her handwriting precise and clinical, emergency pericardiocentesis performed at bedside, 2:48 p.m. 200 cubic centimeters straw-colored serous fluid aspirated. Tamponade physiology reversed. Vital stable. She signed her name and title, RN, and turned to check Myers for access, her body language suggesting the crisis had simply ended and now they moved to the next task, the way professionals do when emotion would be a luxury they cannot afford. Whitfield stood motionless in the doorway, his face a blank mask that was itself a scream. His mouth opened. Closed. He looked at the fluid collection chamber. He looked at Laura. He looked at his reflection in the darkened monitor screen and seemed not to recognize himself. The humiliation was absolute. He had frozen. And she had not. She had moved into the space where he should have been, the space reserved for the physician, the authority, the man in the room, and she had owned it. Every resident had watched it. Every nurse had watched it. Dr. Morse had watched it. And they would all remember exactly who had saved the 8-year-old girl's life while the chief of pediatric neurology clutched the doorframe. His hands began to shake again. Not from fear this time. From rage. She could see it moving through him like a current, transforming him from humiliated into something far more dangerous. A man who had just lost control was a man who would burn everything to regain it. Within the hour, Whitfield had made his calls. 3 of them. The first was to Dr. Patricia Vance, a board member he'd known since medical school at Duke, a woman who had co-authored 3 papers with him and whom he'd convinced to join Seattle General's board specifically because of their shared history. Patricia, it's Marcus. We have a problem. A nurse, new, name's Bennett, just performed an unauthorized cardiac procedure. Pericardiocentesis. On an 8-year-old. Without physician oversight. He paused, letting her ask questions he'd already prepared answers for. No, the girl lived. That's not the point. The point is scope creep and liability. If she'd made a mistake, we'd be looking at a lawsuit that sinks this hospital's insurance rates for 5 years. The conversation lasted for minutes. When he hung up, Vance had already promised to have a conversation with administration. The second call went to the state nursing board, and this time Whitfield was careful. He didn't make threats. He didn't accuse. He simply filed a concern, completely informal, just a colleague looking out for patient safety. I performed an emergency procedure today that should have required physician authorization. The nurse performed it independently. While the outcome was positive, I'm concerned about the precedent this sets. I wanted to flag it with your office. The board administrator assured him they would look into it and open an informal inquiry. Whitfield thanked her with the honeyed gratitude of a man who had just weaponized bureaucracy. The third call was to James Keller, the hospital administrator. His former roommate. His present ally. Whitfield's voice was controlled now, the rage smoothed into something more insidious, concern. James, I hate to bring this to you, but I think we have a personnel issue that's become urgent. The new nurse on pediatrics, Laura Bennett, just performed an invasive procedure without authorization. On my patient. I don't want to overstate it, but I'm genuinely worried she's going to hurt someone before we address the scope of practice issue. And if she does, and we had prior knowledge of her recklessness. He let that hang. He didn't need to finish it. Keller would understand. Prior knowledge plus failure to act equals liability. Equals negligence. Equals malpractice. I'd recommend immediate termination pending investigation. Better to be proactive. Keller said he'd handle it, and they both understood that phrase meant Laura Bennett would be gone by end of shift. Laura received the reassignment notice at 4:19 p.m., printed on hospital letterhead and delivered by Sharon Chen, the nursing director, whose face suggested she was being asked to execute a puppy. I'm sorry, Sharon said quietly, standing in the break room where Laura was restocking supplies. This came from administration. Effective immediately, you're being transferred to general medicine. They're citing the procedure in Maya's room as an authorized scope expansion. She held the letter out. Her hands were shaking. Laura, I witnessed what happened. That girl would be dead without you. I'm going to fight this, but the hospital had insurance to protect. But liability lawyers were cheaper than integrity. But a board member had made a phone call to a fellow board member and things had started moving in ways that couldn't be stopped, only documented. Laura took the letter. She read it once. Whitfield had cited unauthorized performance of invasive procedures beyond the scope of nursing practice. The state nursing board had been notified. An investigation was being opened. Her employment was terminated pending the outcome. Effective immediately. No final shift. Security would escort her out. Her hands remained perfectly steady as she folded the letter. Her face remained a mask. Only later, much later, alone in a hospital laundry at shift change, did something crack. The trembling came then, in the privacy of the industrial space that smelled of detergent and bleach, surrounded by the white noise of washers spinning their endless cycles. But it wasn't fear that made her hand shake. It was restraint. It was the careful, controlled release of pressure that had been building for 3 months, pressure that had kept her moving forward while her actual mission, the reason naval intelligence had embedded her here, collapsed. She folded her scrubs. Each one. The fabric was still warm from the dryer. She folded them into thirds, then halves, creating a perfect square of blue cotton that no longer belonged to her. Her name tag caught the light as she held it. 3 months. That's all they'd given her. 3 months to prove there wasn't a liability issue, to establish herself as normal, to become the kind of invisible nurse that doctors looked through rather than at. 3 months to investigate why an 8-year-old girl had suddenly, mysteriously become paralyzed, why her symptoms matched the neurotoxin profile from a single facility in Eastern Europe, why someone had been willing to poison the daughter of a Marine sergeant major. And now she was done. Blown. Extracted by a termination letter instead of a handler's encrypted message. The toxin investigation would stall. The poisoning would go unsolved. Whoever had done this, whoever had targeted Sergeant Major Rodriguez by attacking his child, would disappear back into whatever intelligence network had sent them, and no one would ever connect the dots except Laura, and she would have no authority, no access, no way to prove any of it. She placed her name tag on top of the folded scrubs. Evidence. One more piece to be catalogued and returned. Security arrived at 5:15 p.m. to escort her from the building. Not unkindly, they were just following orders, but the walk to the exit was humiliating in its own way. Through the corridors where she'd worked. Past the pediatric ward. Past Maya's room, where she could see the girl's father sitting in the bedside chair, his hand on his daughter's foot, still wearing his dress uniform like armor. He didn't look up as she passed. The rain had started outside, hammering the parking lot like applause, and Laura stood under the overhang for 30 seconds, rain drumming on the concrete around her, water pooling in the spaces between her boots. Her phone had buzzed twice during the walk, encrypted messages from her handler in the parking garage. Unknown number. Secure line. The messages were brief. Stand by. New directive incoming. Laura waited. The rain fell. And somewhere above the city, in the gathering dark, the sound of a helicopter began to cut through the storm. The rotor wash shook the windows on the 5th floor at 0600 exactly. The Black Hawk descended through the pre-dawn darkness like a fist closing, its rotors slowing as the landing gear kissed the helipad with the precision of a surgeon placing a needle. For Marines in dress blues disembarked in perfect formation, their uniforms pressed so sharply they could have cut glass. The Navy captain came last, moving with the kind of calm that comes from having already survived the worst. He wore no insignia below his collar, which meant everything. The administrator's office wasn't expecting visitors. The captain walked past the reception desk without slowing, didn't acknowledge the startled admin assistant, and knocked once on the oak door before entering. His voice, when he spoke, carried the weight of operational authority. "I'm requesting Master Chief Bennett. By name and service number. Now." Word travels fast through hospitals. By the time the captain reached the ground floor, the conference room was filling. Residents whispered to attendings. Attendings made calls to department heads. Security straightened their ties. The hospital operates on hierarchies like any military installation, and something about for armed Marines in dress uniform walking through pediatric neurology changed the atmospheric pressure. Dr. Whitfield was already seated when Laura entered, his smirk in place like armor. He'd won before, many times. Insubordinate nurses got fired. Board members had his back. The state nursing board took months to investigate complaints. This was just another disciplinary hearing, another opportunity to demonstrate his authority in front of the hospital hierarchy. He'd probably get a commendation for handling personnel issues decisively. Laura's career would end before lunch. The gunnery sergeant was broad-shouldered with a scar bisecting his left eyebrow. When he stepped forward, his voice carried the precision of someone who'd spent 20 years giving orders that had to be understood the first time. "We're requesting anchorage," he said clearly. "Operational call sign only. Reporting for active duty recall." The room didn't move. Whitfield's smirk faltered. The veteran working hospital security, a man named Torres, 53 years old, 3 tours as a combat medic, straightened to attention in the back corner. His jaw tightened. He'd heard that call sign only twice in his career. Once in a classified briefing. Once in a helicopter over Kandahar province. He spoke without being asked, his voice steady as a heartbeat monitor. "Master Chief Petty Officer. Navy Special Warfare. 3 combat deployments." Laura stood in the doorway wearing her Seattle General ID badge. She hadn't spoken. The room's eyes pivoted toward her like a weapon system acquiring target lock. The Navy captain opened a folder thick enough to hold someone's entire life. His voice was measured, each word placed with the precision of ordnance. "Master Chief Bennett citation. 17 lives saved under direct fire. Helmand Province, San Juan Valley. Including then-Corporal Carlos Rodriguez, United States Marine Corps." He paused. 6 years of covert medical intelligence operations. Eyes-only clearance. Operation designation classified. Missions in support of Naval Special Warfare Command and JSOC Task Force elements. The papers in his hands looked official in a way that made the room go very still. Sergeant Major Carlos Rodriguez stood in the doorway behind Laura, his hand resting on the back of a wheelchair. His daughter Maya sat quietly in it, her small frame dwarfed by the chair's width. She was 9 now. 3 years ago, she couldn't move anything below her neck. Now her fingers twitched against the armrest, small movements, but movements. Rodriguez lifted his left sleeve slowly. The tattoo was faded, worked into his forearm in blue-black ink that had aged like old denim. It read simply, "Anchorage." Below it, the coordinates of a landing zone. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of a man who'd watched someone save his life in the wreckage of an ambush. "Helmand Province. November 2011. San Juan Valley, about 4 clicks northeast of FOB Shank. My squad got hit with an IED. Vehicle rolled. I went out." He paused. A tremor moved through him. "I had a severed femoral artery. I was losing consciousness. 3 minutes, maybe 4, and I wouldn't have come back." The rain outside hammered against the windows like applause. "She carried me," he continued, his voice cracking like old leather. 3 miles through enemy territory. My blood all over her? Enemy contact the whole way. She kept talking to me the whole time, kept me conscious, kept pressure on the artery with one hand while she moved with a rifle in the other. He swallowed hard. She moved like something inhuman. Like she was operating in a different speed than the rest of us. 10 seconds of absolute silence filled the conference room. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like distant artillery. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Whitfield's face had drained of color, and the smirk was gone entirely, replaced by something that looked like the moment a man realizes he's been standing on an edge he couldn't see. Laura's hands remained perfectly still. She didn't look at her father, the man she'd been sent to protect, the mission she'd been pulled from when Whitfield terminated her. She didn't look at Maya, though her peripheral vision tracked the girl's small movements in the wheelchair, the miraculous return of motor control that had started the moment Laura began unauthorized treatment protocols at 0530 this morning. She'd walked into Maya's room in the pre-dawn darkness, had found the girl's vitals on the monitor, had begun the chelation therapy that would start clearing the heavy metals from her system, the targeted neurotoxin that had been specifically designed to paralyze children of high-ranking military personnel. A message. A threat. A demonstration that someone knew where to hurt the people Sergeant Major Rodriguez was protecting. Dr. Whitfield's hands gripped the edge of the conference table. His medical degree hung on the wall behind him, framed in walnut. His reputation, everything he'd built on the assumption that this blonde nurse was just another subordinate who needed to learn her place, was in the process of being systematically dismantled by a single piece of information: she'd never been in this hospital to learn anything. The hospital board president, a woman named Chen who'd been at the table when Whitfield made his wager about how long the new girl would last, sat very still. She was the one who'd received the phone call in 30 minutes from the JSOC legal officer. She was the one who'd be informed that Whitfield's termination was now a condition of the federal contract that funded Seattle General's pediatric neurology department. She didn't know that yet, but she could see it coming like weather. Rodriguez's voice dropped to almost nothing. She saved my life so I could come home to my daughter. And now she's the only one who can save my daughter's life. The room stayed suspended in that silence, the kind that only happens when the world reorganizes itself in real time. I need to get back to her, Laura said quietly. Her voice had changed, no longer deferential, no longer carefully pitched below the men in the room. This was someone accustomed to operating in environments where hesitation meant death. Myasfa needs monitoring. The chelation therapy requires constant adjustment based on her electrolyte levels. It wasn't a request. It was a briefing. The distinction hung in the air like the difference between asking permission and informing someone of decisions already made. The Navy captain nodded once. Granted. Sergeant Major, you're with her. The board president's face drained of color as he turned from the Navy captain. He stood slowly, his jaw working like he was chewing words he didn't want to speak. Dr. Whitfield, he said, his voice steady but stripped of warmth. Step outside. It wasn't a request. It was a command. Whitfield didn't move. His eyes locked on Sergeant Major Rodriguez, then on Laura standing motionless at the back of the conference room. Understanding began to crack across his face, not understanding, recognition. The recognition of a man watching his entire constructed world collapse in real time. The board president repeated, "Now, doctor." They walked out together. The room exhaled. What happened in that hallway took 90 seconds. The board president's administrative assistant had already pulled up her laptop, her hands moving with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd done this before. The video was everywhere, trending on 3 hospital staff social media groups. The clip of Whitfield throwing Laura's lunch tray from her hands in the cafeteria, his face twisted with contempt. The moment he hurled Maya's chart at her feet, his voice drawling that insult. Both angles. Both incidents. Posted by nursing staff who'd been watching, waiting, documenting. The timestamp showed it had gone viral at 2:14 a.m. But that wasn't the worst part for Whitfield. That wasn't the part that killed him. His phone buzzed. Then again. Then continuously. The first call came from Dr. Harrison Chen, the board member he'd studied medical school with. "I'm withdrawing my recommendation for your department," Chen said flatly. "And I'm withdrawing myself from the board. Get a lawyer." Click. The second call came from his research funding contact at Johns Hopkins. "Grants frozen pending review," she said. "Don't call back until you have legal representation." The third call came from his former mentor, the man Whitfield had built his entire career around impressing, the one whose name and reputation had opened every door. Dr. Richard Ashford, former Surgeon General of the United States. The man whose phone call could make or break careers. The man who had taken a brilliant but arrogant resident under his wing 15 years ago and shaped him into something approaching a physician. "Marcus, I saw the video," Ashford said. His voice sounded like ice cracking. "I called the board president while you were standing in that hallway." Whitfield said nothing. "I'm withdrawing my recommendation for the Ashford Research Initiative grant. Your name comes off the endowment. And I'm suggesting to that board that they handle this internally before the state medical board handles it publicly." Ashford's voice dropped lower. "You had every advantage. Every opportunity. Every connection. And you used them to bully a woman who was saving your patients while you froze." Click. The silence that followed was the sound of a career ending. Not dramatically. Not with public scandal or legal destruction. Just ending. The way a light goes off when you flip the switch. Inside the conference room, Laura had not moved. She stood with her weight distributed evenly, her breathing controlled, the way she'd stood for 12 years while people with less competence and fewer scars ranked above her. The way she'd stood through 3 tours in Helmand province. Through loss. Through watching good people die while she lived. Her hands didn't shake. Her voice didn't waver. Her composure didn't fracture. Nursing Director Chen was the first to speak. Laura, I want to, she stopped, searching for words large enough. I apologize. I apologize for every moment you spent at this hospital being treated as less than you are. You didn't know, Laura said simply. Her voice had changed. Not louder. Quieter, actually. But it carried different weight now. Authority that had nothing to do with rank insignia. I wasn't meant to be known. The Navy captain inclined his head slightly. Your cover was perfect, Master Chief. Your work here was noted. Your patient outcomes are in the top 3% of the pediatric ward. My patient isn't discharged yet, Laura said. Maya Rodriguez. Sergeant Major Rodriguez rolled his daughter's wheelchair forward. The little girl was watching Laura with wide eyes, the way children watch people who moved something inside them without understanding why. The toxin exposure, Laura continued, turning to the board president. What happened during the procedure wasn't unauthorized. It was the only intervention that would keep her alive long enough for full diagnostic workup. Dr. Whitfield froze. I didn't. The board president nodded slowly. Your personnel record shows no prior disciplinary action. No complaints prior to yesterday. Your technical evaluations were exemplary. He pulled up a tablet, tapping through files. We're formally reinstating your employment status, clearing the complaint to the nursing board, and he paused, looking at the Navy captain. I'm assuming there are arrangements being made. Master Chief Bennett is on special assignment, the captain said. Her work here is concluded. The hospital's cooperation in this matter will be noted at the highest levels. You handled it correctly, once you understood the facts. Laura felt Sergeant Major Rodriguez watching her. She could feel the weight of 9 years of confusion finally resolving in his mind. The blonde nurse who'd been kind to his daughter. The woman who'd stayed late, brought ice cream to pediatrics on weekends, asked about his service without prying. The woman whose hands had moved with the precision of someone who'd done trauma medicine in places where there was no time for hesitation. You were in Helmand, he said quietly. 2nd Platoon. 1st Platoon, Charlie Company, Laura answered. 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines. Dark Horse Battalion. You were with the Regional Commander's security detail. I was bleeding, Sergeant Major Rodriguez said. His voice carried something between grief and gratitude. I remember the weight of you. The strength. I remember thinking, this person is going to die carrying me. And then I was in the evac bird and everything went red. You didn't die, Laura said. That was the mission. The words hung there. Just a nurse. Just doing her job. Except she'd been doing it for 12 years across continents and circumstances, in uniform and out of it, in hospitals and in ditches, saving people and carrying them and rebuilding them with whatever medical knowledge and force of will she could summon. Administrator Keller cleared his throat. I want to be clear that Seattle General fully supports Master Chief Bennett's work here. The decision to terminate her yesterday was made under incomplete information, by Dr. Whitfield's specific request and on the basis of his professional recommendation. That recommendation has been thoroughly discredited. He looked at the Navy captain. How should we handle the official record? Expunge it, the captain said. As if yesterday never happened. Master Chief Bennett's resignation letter will state it was a temporary assignment conclusion, not a termination. She left to pursue other opportunities. And Dr. Whitfield, the board president, asked carefully. The silence returned. This time it felt different. Heavier. The kind of silence that comes from understanding that a man had just watched everything he built get disassembled by people for whom he was utterly insignificant. That, the Navy captain said, is the hospital's decision. But I'd suggest you move quickly. The video has already reached the state medical board. The inquiry will begin within 48 hours. Laura turned toward the door. Sergeant Major Rodriguez wheeled Maya toward her, and his daughter reached out with one thin arm, her paralyzed legs still useless but her eyes tracking with perfect clarity. Are you leaving? Maya asked. I have to, Laura said. She crouched down, meeting the girl at eye level. But you're going to be okay. Better than okay. The doctors are going to find out what's making you sick, and then they're going to fix it. How do you know? Maya's voice was small and certain at the same time. Because I'm very hard to stop, Laura said. And so are you. I can tell. She stood, moved past them toward the door, and didn't look back. The Navy captain fell into step beside her. Behind them, the sound of the board president already on his phone, already making calls, already managing the cascade of administrative destruction that comes when an institution realizes one of its highest-ranking physicians is a liability rather than an asset. The hallway outside was empty. Dr. Whitfield was already gone, escorted from the building by hospital security with 20 years of his professional reputation in a box under his arm. 18 months passes like a breath held and finally released. Laura Bennett moves through the world differently now, not hidden, not performing deference, but fully visible as the person she's always been. The Navy and Marine Corps had formalized her position in the Medical Intelligence Division, training combat medics in advanced trauma protocols based on the neurotoxin treatment she developed for Maya. 14 other children are alive because Laura asked questions when doctors stopped looking. The treatment protocol is now standard. Her work matters. No one pretends otherwise anymore. The morning she brings Maya in for her 18-month follow-up appointment, Seattle General's corridors smell exactly as they always have, antiseptic layered over something deeper, something human. The fluorescent lights hum their familiar frequency, unchanged despite everything that's shifted underneath. Maya Rodriguez walks beside her with the unself-conscious confidence of an 8-year-old who's forgotten what paralysis felt like, her small hand warm in Laura's. The girl's legs are strong now, her stride unguarded, her mind occupied entirely with the critical question of whether she has a real chance at making the select soccer team. Coach said I'm fast, Maya says, tugging Laura's hand for emphasis. But Jenny beats me on the drills. Do you think I should practice sprints? Or footwork? Laura considers this with the same careful attention she'd once given to neural assessments. Both. Sprints build speed. Footwork builds control. You need both. That's what Coach said. Maya grins, vindicated. I knew it. The pediatric neurology wing hasn't changed, same pale green walls, same collection of patient artwork taped to the bulletin board, same smell of hand sanitizer mixing with the faint mustiness of old paper files. Dr. Reynolds, the neurologist who'd taken over Maya's care after Whitfield's departure, reviews her follow-up scans in the examination room with professional satisfaction. The neural pathways continue to show normal development. The toxicology markers are clean. No residual effects from the organophosphate exposure. No setbacks, no surprises. Just a healthy child who used to be paralyzed and isn't anymore. She's remarkable, Dr. Reynolds says, not for the first time. Whatever treatment protocol you developed, it worked. Laura nods, watching Maya swing her legs from the examination table, still chattering about soccer. The human body is capable of more recovery than we usually give it credit for. We just have to ask the right questions. The afternoon sun slants through the hospital's front entrance as they leave, turning the glass doors into mirrors. Laura sees herself reflected, civilian clothes, hair down, face unbothered. No rank visible. No indication of what she carries. This is how she moves now, not in scrubs and lies, but in plain sight with all the authority of someone who doesn't need a uniform to be recognized. They cut through the hospital plaza toward the parking structure, and that's when Laura sees him. The folding table sits between a soap vendor selling lavender-infused products and a woman with a tamale cart. It's a farmer's market setup, weekend casual, the kind of place where people sell homemade goods and local services. Dr. Marcus Whitfield sits behind a placard that reads "Affordable supplemental coverage, ask me how," in letters that want to be professional but look desperate instead. His shirt is rumpled, untucked slightly at one side. He's gained weight, the kind that comes from months of not moving, not caring, not being anyone worth impressing. His eyes track past Maya and Laura without recognition, scanning for the next potential customer, the next chance at a sale that will never come. Under his chair, visible in a cardboard box shoved against one of the table legs, Laura sees his medical license framed behind glass. Not hanging on a wall anymore. Not displayed in an office that no longer exists. Just a frame in a box under a folding table in a strip mall parking lot, a permanent reminder of what he was and will never be again. The MD is still there. The authority is gone. Laura doesn't slow down. She doesn't acknowledge him. She doesn't give him the satisfaction of being recognized, doesn't offer him even that small confirmation of her awareness of his existence. To give him that would be a kind of mercy, and mercy is something he didn't extend to Maya when her life hung in a paracentesis needles with the possibility. So Laura simply holds Maya's hand and keeps walking, her stride unchanged, her pace steady. "Can we get tamales?" Maya asks, already distracted by the smell drifting from the cart. "Not today. We have dinner plans with your father." Laura's voice carries the same quiet authority it always has, the voice of someone who makes decisions and sees them through. "We'll pick them up next time." Behind them, Whitfield's hands shake slightly as he reorganizes brochures that don't need organizing. He watches them go, the Master Chief Petty Officer he once called Sweetheart, walking away with the patient who destroyed him. Maya chatters about soccer tryouts and footwork, completely unaware that she's just past the man whose career evaporated the moment he decided she wasn't worth listening to. She doesn't know his name. She won't remember his face. To her, he's already less than a memory, he's nothing. That evening, 6 miles from the strip mall and the folding table, the San Antonio Convention Center hosts a military medical conference where 300 trauma surgeons, combat medics, and naval intelligence officers gather to share research. Laura stands at a podium with Sergeant Major Carlos Rodriguez beside her, Maya in a new soccer uniform that fits her perfectly, the fabric crisp and unwrinkled. The girl looks small standing next to her father's uniformed frame, but the way she stands beside Laura suggests she understands something about strength that has nothing to do with size. The Navy and Marine Corps medal feels heavier than Laura expected. Cold. Serious. Real. Sergeant Major Rodriguez presents it with steady hands, his voice wavering only once when he says, "This medal honors a warrior who saved my life in Helmand Province 9 years ago. That same warrior saved my daughter's life 18 months ago. This is for Laura Bennett, Master Chief Petty Officer, Navy Special Warfare. This is for everyone she's carried to safety." The applause crashes through the auditorium like a wave finally reaching shore. Laura accepts it the way she accepts everything, without visible emotion, without gratitude, without the performance of humility. She holds the medal for one moment, then steps to the microphone. "The ones who have seen the worst often give the most," she says, "and that's all." 40 seconds of standing ovation. Laura steps back. The moment passes. This is the nature of being seen, it's sudden, it's consuming, and then it's over, and you keep walking. In the parking lot afterward, a young corpsman in dress blues approaches nervously, his sleeve pushed up to show shrapnel scars running the length of his forearm like a topographical map of survival. He asks about nursing school, about whether the Navy would pay for it, about whether he'd be good enough. His hands shake slightly when he talks. Laura listens the way she's always listened, with the full weight of her attention focused entirely on him, on his words, on the possibility of his future. She spends 20 minutes in the parking lot, her voice patient and exact, her guidance specific. She tells him the names of the programs. She tells him what the Navy looks for. She tells him he's already proven he can survive, which is the hardest part. The rest is just learning how to help other people do the same. This is who she's always been. Not the rank. Not the decorations. Not the reveal that cracked the world open and scattered a hospital's hierarchy like broken glass. Just a medic who carries people to safety, whatever form that takes. A woman who asks the right questions when silence is easier. A warrior whose greatest weapon is the willingness to see someone no one else is looking at and say, I see you. You matter. You deserve better. The corpsman's hand steadied as Laura spoke. By the time he walks away, he's already thinking about enrollment applications. By the time he reaches his barracks, he's already becoming someone new. This is the invisible work, the work that happens in parking lots and strip mall tables, in quiet conversations and careful attention, in the space between what the world says about you and what you know to be true. Whitfield sold insurance policies to indifferent strangers that same evening, his framed license growing dustier in the box beneath his chair, visible to no one but him. The weight of the world had shifted. The light had moved. And Laura Bennett walked forward into a life where her strength no longer needed to hide. If you've ever been underestimated by someone in power, please like and subscribe. Share this video with someone who deserves to know they're never alone. And comment, what would you have done in Laura's position?